Hey, what's going on? My name is Jack Lane. Welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video, we're going to be following a Screen Rant article about Bond 26. James Bond 26 is something that we don't know much about at the moment. We don't know who's playing Bond after Craig ended his tenure as Bond after like 16 years in No Time to Die. Technically, Daniel Craig is still James Bond at this current moment in time because his predecessor hasn't yet come in to take the role. However, it hasn't stopped people from speculating, and I thought I want to jump on because Screen Rant had published an article, and I thought this would be quite fun to talk about. James Bond 26, being a 1960s movie, could finally use one part of canon that all 007 movies ignored. If you've been following the rumors, if you've been following literally anything online about this movie, you will know there is a big indication that this could be potentially taking place in the 1960s. It would make things, I guess, a little easier because then you wouldn't have that issue of where does this fit in after No Time to Die. Because everyone thinks all the Bond films are connected. They're not. They're just going to reboot. But if it was to be taking place in the 1960s, you could do it as like a prequel to Dr. No or a sequel to Connery's Bond. It doesn't really matter where you put it in canon timeline, but that's what fandoms do. Really, ever since the MCU, they're like, where does this take place in the timeline? Where is it? Blah, blah, blah. However, this is what the article has to say. James Bond 26 has to take a radically different approach towards the character in order to stay fresh. And taking place in the 1960s could be the stylistic switch-up that the franchise needs. After the explosive ending in No Time to Die, the James Bond series has found itself in somewhat of a no man's land, with the cinematic version of Bond dead. There's no easy way to carry this franchise into the future, therefore one of the most effective ways of keeping Ian Fleming's classic spy alive could actually be to bring him back into the past. Not only would a Bond movie in the 1960s avoid any unnecessary complications following the character's death, but it would also be the perfect opportunity to introduce some aspects from the original novels that haven't been present in the movies. While Daniel Craig's movies were mostly very strong adaptations, the decision to bring the spy into present day meant that certain time-specific features of the books had to be dropped. With few details about Bond 26 released, there's still time for a bold subversion of classic style. So this would, of course, stop that issue and then a whole No Time to Die thing, right? It wouldn't be an issue anymore if it was set in the 1960s. There's also another thing that would be vastly different, and no one's really spoke about this. But if Bond was set between the 60s to 2021, anywhere in that time frame, it wouldn't have to deal with the fact that Bond no longer works for Her Majesty's Secret Service. Because when Bond was created in 1952 and the first book was published, the Queen was in power. And she stayed in power for 70 years, right? Meaning she did the 60-year tenure with Bond, like the movie Bonds, all the way through, right? She did the books for Bond, all the way through as well. Because she was Queen when Bond started. And now if they were to do a new Bond film, it would be His Majesty's Secret Service. So they'd also get away with that issue, I guess. And it's not a big issue because you just change the tone of it. You change the name of it. That's not a big issue. But it would be, I'd say, a strange thing for 26 films or 25 films in the series to have Her Majesty's Secret Service and then be His Majesty's Secret Service. I think they're going to address this at some point. I mean, Bond says for her eyes only or Her Majesty's Secret Service. It will be for his eyes only and His Majesty's Secret Service. So what would be the perfect sense for Bond would be setting it in the 1960s so you didn't have to deal with that issue as well as the No Time to Die issue. Of course, the Queen issue really isn't a major thing, but a 1960s set James Bond movie could finally adapt Blades Club from Ian Fleming's books. Blades Club has a long-standing history in the novels. If Bond 26 does decide to bring the character back to the 60s, it would finally be possible for the movies to do a more accurate adaptation of Ian Fleming's books. The movie could ditch the futuristic tech of Craig's movies for a more grounded, human-focused story like the ones Fleming wrote. One aspect of his novels that was notably absent from the Craig movies was Blades Club, the fictional gentleman's club that first appeared in Moonraker and subsequently became a staple of the Bond novels. Blades Club is often used as a meeting place for Bond and M, the head of Secret Intelligence Service. Though Bond isn't technically a member of the club, the location appears several times when the espionage agent needs a neutral location to escape safely. The location didn't play a large role in the Daniel Craig movies, most likely because it would have felt outdated in a modern environment. However, if the Bond were back to the 1960s, it would fit it perfectly. Die Another Day sort of introduced Blades. The movie reimagined Blades Club for a modern setting. Bear in mind, this film was back in 2002, so that was a while ago, right? The only time that Blade Club has actually been seen on screen in the James Bond movies was in Die Another Day. But even that was little more than a cameo. In that movie, Blades Club is the name of the fencing association owned by Gustav Graves. Although it has the same name, the location isn't the same at all. It's a nice Easter egg for audiences familiar with the Fleming books, but the narrative changes the mean that an accurate portrayal of Blades Club is still missing from the movies. And it goes on to say, taking James Bond back to its roots is the only way to make Blades Club work as a concept. If Bond 26 was going to introduce Blades Club, it wouldn't make sense to change the meaning like Die Another Day did. This Easter egg has already been done, and teasing the audience with this reference again might not play well with long-time fans of the franchise. Taking James Bond back to its roots, both thematically and temporarily, is the only way to truly make Blades Club work as a concept, and it would separate this movie from those that came before it. And do you know what? The Blades Club is a huge place in the Bond books, right? It is. And it never really featured in the movies. It did, of course, in Die Another Day, but that was a fencing club. Like I said here in the article, it didn't really... It was a nice nod, but it didn't really do much. I've read the books. I love the books. They are a great piece of media. If you want to read a Bond book, they're great. They still somewhat hold up today. I have fun with them, but then I'm a big Bond fan. Setting it in 1960s, they could do that, right? However, I think setting it in 1960s, they're missing the bigger picture here. They could set the movie in 1960s, get away from the Craig era as a whole, right? Because the issue with the Craig era was it had to reinvent itself because of Jason Bourne. So Bond changed because of Bourne, right? Whereas Bond wouldn't have changed if Bourne hadn't have existed. Keeping it going in today's real life is great. Keeping it going into today's current climate of situations with the Ukraine and Russia war and all the wars that are going on in the world, that's great to do. But because we are currently living in them war states, do we really want it jammed down our throats again? The issue, I think, we're putting in the 1960s is you don't want to make it feel too outdated to people being like, but this is Bond. I want to see like Craig's sort of Bond. Or because Bond naturally got darker over time with his persona and who he is. The Craig Bonds are the darkest Bond films that have really ever been made. He's cynical. He doesn't care what people think. He's a cold-blooded killer, and Craig plays it so well. So by changing the 1960 style, you've got to get an actor who can play it like Craig did in a way, whilst giving their own unique spin on it, and keeping it professionally within that 1960s setting. Of course, I discussed how it would dramatically not impact the change of Her Majesty's Secret Service, of course. But if they'd set Bond in current day, I honestly think they should name it His Majesty's Secret Service, Do not do a rehash of Her Majesty. Just do the name His Majesty's Secret Service and create a bold new story. Who is Bond? Who's going to be Bond? I don't know. At this current moment, that as far as I'm aware, from what I've read and what I've heard, they haven't yet picked a James Bond. But Bond being set in the 1960s is something I have heard multiple times from different sources, that they are looking at whether this would be a viable option. Of course, Amazon are the ones that now own MGM Studios. They're still putting these movies into cinemas, but it wouldn't surprise me if Amazon try and go for a Bond film that people want, and they pick a Bond actor that people also want. So, I don't know. I mean, there's been a couple of questions about who's going to be Bond next, predictions and things. I'm unsure about it at the moment. But once I get an answer, once it's announced, we'll sure as hell be talking about it. I mean, from when Bond is announced, it'll be about 2 years. About 1.5 years, I reckon. A year and a half before we see the film. So, yeah, I mean, so far it's been 3 years without a Bond film. We've gone longer without a Bond film, so it's not too much to be worrying at the moment. But Bond will be back. We know that. It's just when. And a 1960s setting could do it some justice. So with that being said, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you want Bond to stay in the current timeline, as in like 2025, 2026? Or do you want James Bond to go back to the 1960s setting, 1970s, and we have all this sort of cleverly written work that introduces more elements from the Fleming novels? I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Drop me a like, drop me a comment, let me know all of your opinions, as I would love to hear them. Subscribe, follow me, turn on the notification bell, drop a like on the video, and I'll see you all in the next one. As always, stay cinematic. Catch you soon. Bye.